The bullets were hitting. Oberleutnant Franz Becker could see them, bright tracers punching into the American fighter's fuselage, ripping through aluminum, tearing metal. 20 rounds, 30, 40. The P-47 kept flying. Franz's hands were shaking now on the stick of his Focke-Wulf-Wutty. 3 seconds of cannon fire, enough to obliterate any aircraft he'd ever faced. The American ahead was trailing smoke, oil streaming black against the morning sky. Pieces of cowling tumbled away, but the wings stayed level. The propeller kept turning, and then, impossibly, the American began firing back. 8 machine guns lit up. Franz felt impacts hammer his effluent. He broke hard right, diving away, his heart hammering. Behind him, the wounded P-4 completed a gentle turn toward England. Franz checked his fuel, barely enough to make it home. He looked back one last time at the American fighter, still visible, still flying, trailing that impossible plume of smoke. "Scheisse," he whispered. That was April 12th, 1944. 3 days later, Franz Becker would be dead, shot down by a P over Normandy. But before he died, he would write something in his combat log that would haunt German intelligence for the rest of the war. Shot one jug 40-plus times. It looked at me and kept flying. This is the story of the Republic P-47 Thunderbolt, the fighter the Germans mocked as too fat, too heavy, too slow, and how it became the weapon they feared most. Not because it could outfly them, but because no matter how many times they hit it, no matter how much damage they inflicted, it simply refused to die. And the men inside, they came home. 300 miles away, Lieutenant Robert Bobby Hayes sat in the cockpit of his P-47 at an airfield in southern England, writing a letter home. "Dear Mom, you asked me what it's like to fly the Thunderbolt. Everyone back home probably thinks we're flying sleek, beautiful machines like in the movies. The truth? My plane looks like someone strapped wings to a water heater and called it a fighter. The other guys call it the Jug, short for Juggernaut. It's not fast like the Mustang. It can't turn like the Spitfire. It's so heavy I need half the runway just to get airborne. But Mom, here's the thing. Yesterday, I took 17 hits. 17 holes I counted when I got back. One shell went clean through my wing. Another took out half my rudder. I should have died. Instead, I flew home, landed, and the crew chief said, 'We'll have her ready by morning, sir.' So yeah, she's ugly, but she brings me home, and that's all that matters. Your son, Bobby." He sealed the letter, walked to the operations board, and saw his name listed for the afternoon escort mission. Bomber support over France. He looked at his P-7 sitting on the hard stand, massive, blunt, uncompromising. "Ugly as sin," his wingman Tommy said, appearing beside him. "But I'll take ugly over dead any day." Bobby nodded. Amen to that. 4 hours later, Bobby's P-7 would take 23 more hits during a running battle with FW-190s. And 4 hours after that, he'd be writing another letter home. In Bavaria, Dr. Werner Scholz stood in front of a burned American fighter, trying to understand why his brother was dead. Hans Scholz, Werner's younger brother, a fighter pilot, had been killed 3 weeks ago, shot down over France by a P-47. The combat report said Hans had hit the American fighter repeatedly. Good solid strikes the P-47 had smoked, slowed. Then it had turned around and killed Hans with a burst so sudden, so overwhelming, that Hans's wingman barely had time to see it happen. Werner was an aeronautical engineer. Before the war, he designed racing gliders, machines of pure elegance where every gram mattered. When the Luftwaffe recruited him, he'd brought that philosophy, lightness, speed, grace. Now he stood in front of this captured people, and all he felt was rage. 14,000 pounds empty weight, Major Hoffman said, reading from a technical sheet. Fully loaded for combat, over 19,000. Werner's Messerschmitt 109 weighed 7,000 pounds loaded. This American monster was nearly 3 times that mass. "It's obscene," Werner said quietly. "Yes," Hoffman agreed, "and it's killing our best pilots." He handed Werner a folder. "Find out why." Werner opened it. Combat reports, loss statistics, and one number that made his blood run cold: P-47 pilot survival rate when aircraft shot down, percent Luftwaffe pilot survival rate when D-aircraft shot down, 24%. Werner stared at those numbers for a long time. "I want to know everything," he said finally. "Engine, armor, systems, everything." Hoffman nodded. "You have 3 weeks. I need a full technical assessment." Werner looked at the massive American fighter again. "I'll need less than that," he said, "to understand why it won't die." The disassembly began the next morning. Werner's team included Klaus, a young draftsman fresh from university, and Stefan, a veteran mechanic who'd worked on WWII 90s since 1941. They stood around the vehicle with cutting torches and tool cases. "Where do we start?" Klaus asked. Werner walked to the nose. "The engine always start with the heart." When they removed the massive cowling, all 3 men stopped and stared. The Pratt & Whitney R2800 Double Wasp was a monster. 18 cylinders arranged in 2 radial rows, each cylinder the size of a soup can. The entire assembly was so large a grown man could crawl inside the cylinder ring. "My God," Klaus whispered, "it's enormous." Stefan, who'd spent years maintaining German inline engines, walked around it slowly. "Over 2,000 horsepower," he said. "But look," he pointed at the cylinder mounting system. "Each cylinder is a separate unit. You can remove and replace them individually." Werner examined the maintenance manual they'd found in the cockpit. It was written in simple English, but the diagrams were clear. "Field maintainable," Werner murmured. "They expect combat damage. They've designed every system to be repaired by ordinary mechanics with basic tools." Klaus frowned. "We can repair our engines too." "Can we?" Werner asked. He thought about the Daimler-Benz engines in the Bf 109. Complex, highly tuned, requiring specialized tools and expert knowledge. How long to replace a damaged cylinder on a 109? Klaus hesitated. I don't know. Days? According to this, Werner tapped the American manual, a trained crew can do it in under an hour. He moved to the turbo supercharger installation, a massive, complex system that used exhaust gases to compress incoming air. It was the secret to the P-47's high-altitude performance. At 30,000 feet, where German fighters gasped for air, the Thunderbolt still had full power. "Brilliant," Werner admitted. "Complicated, heavy, expensive, but brilliant." They moved deeper into the aircraft. The armor stopped Werner cold. Behind the pilot's seat, a steel plate 3/4 of an inch thick. Another plate behind the headrest, more armor protecting the oil cooler, the engine accessories, the ammunition feeds. Werner pressed his hand against it. "This is excessive." Stefan shook his head. "This is American." He pointed to additional armor around the cockpit floor. "They've protected everything that could kill the pilot. Not token protection, real protection." Werner climbed into the cockpit. The seat was surrounded by steel. He realized a pilot sitting here was in a steel box. Bullets could tear the aircraft apart, but the man inside had a chance. He thought about Hans, about the thin aluminum and minimal armor of the FD, about how one well-placed round could kill a German pilot instantly. His hands clenched on the control stick. "Document everything," he said quietly. "Every armor plate, every thickness, every angle." His voice cracked slightly. "I want to know exactly how much they value their pilots' lives." Over the next week, they found redundancy everywhere. 3 separate hydraulic systems. If one failed, the others took over. Multiple fuel tanks with self-sealing rubber that swelled when punctured, automatically closing holes. Electrical backup generators, control cables routed through different paths, so battle damage wouldn't sever them all at once. Klaus kept a running tally. 27 redundant systems, he said one evening. 27 separate ways this aircraft can survive catastrophic damage. Werner examined a second captured P-foot. This one recovered from a forced landing. It had been hit 127 times. He counted each hole personally. Cannon shells through the wing, machine gun rounds through the fuselage, one engine cylinder completely destroyed. The pilot had flown at 60 kilometers and landed it in a field. "How?" Klaus asked, staring at the wreckage. Werner pointed to the wing structure, multiple load-bearing spars, not the single main beam German fighters used, but several working together. If one breaks, the others carry the load. He showed Klaus the damaged cylinder. "See? The engine kept running on 17 cylinders instead of 18. He pulled out the manual again, finding the section on emergency procedures. Page after page of instructions for flying with damaged systems. How to land with one landing gear. How to restart a dead engine. How to navigate home with instruments shot out. "They don't just expect damage," Werner said slowly. "They've embraced it. They've designed an aircraft that assumes it will be torn apart. And they've given the pilot every possible tool to bring it home anyway." Klaus was quiet for a moment. Then, "We would never build something like this." "No," Werner agreed. "We build for perfection. They build for survival." The numbers told a stark story. The P-47 Thunderbolt, 15,683 aircraft built. Combat losses, pre-die air, not pilot deaths. 9% survival rate when shot down, 73%. Meanwhile, Luftwaffe fighters, the Bf-109 and F-2, over 34,000 built. But pilot survival rate when shot down, only 24%. By 1944, the average Luftwaffe pilot's life expectancy was 3 weeks. 3 weeks. Werner requested a meeting with frontline pilots. He needed to understand how the P-47 fought, not just how it was built. 3 pilots arrived at the facility, a major named Hartmann with 20 kills, a lieutenant named Müller with 8, and a young Unteroffizier, barely 20 years old, named Dieter Vogel with 2. Werner showed them the disassembled P-47. "Gentlemen," he said, "I need you to tell me how you fight these aircraft." Hartmann spoke first. "You don't dogfight with them. They're too heavy, too slow in turns. At low altitude, we have the advantage. But, Werner prompted. But they dive like falling anvils, Hartman continued. They'll be above you at 25,000 feet, where our engines can barely breathe. Then they dive, hit you with 850s, and climb back up before you can react. If you chase them up, you run out of airspeed and they kill you. Lieutenant Muller nodded grimly. And if you do hit one, if you get a good firing pass and pump rounds into them, half the time they just keep flying. He looked at the armor plates. Now I see why. Young Dieter Vogel hadn't spoken yet. Werner turned to him. And you, Unteroffizier, what's your experience? Dieter's face was pale. I shot one 3 days ago, Herr Doctor, over Normandy. I came out of the sun, perfect position, 3-second burst with cannons and machine guns. I saw hits all over his fuselage, pieces flying off. He swallowed hard. He turned around and nearly killed me. I barely got away. Dieter looked at Werner with haunted eyes. It's like they don't care that you've shot them. They just get angry and shoot back. Werner nodded slowly. Because the pilot inside knows he's going to survive, he said. He's not panicking about dying, he's fighting back. Werner's report to Luftwaffe Command was scheduled for May 4th. The night before, he sat in his office, organizing his notes. A telegram arrived. Regret to inform you Hans Scholz wounded in action. Stop. Lost left arm. Stop. Stable condition. Stop. Ruhpolding Military Hospital. Werner's hands shook as he read it. Wounded, not dead, but wounded badly. He caught the first train to Ruhpolding. The hospital smelled of antiseptic and pain. Werner found Hans in a ward with 24 other wounded pilots. His brother looked 10 years older, gaunt, bandaged, his left arm ending in a bulky dressing at the shoulder. Werner, Hans said weakly, you didn't have to come. Werner sat beside the bed. What happened? Hans closed his eyes. P-47. I hit it. God, I hit it so many times. Saw smoke. Saw pieces fall off. He opened his eyes. It turned around. All 8 guns. My aircraft came apart. His voice broke. My wingman pulled me out of the wreck. They said I'll live. Werner took his brother's remaining hand. But I won't fly again, Hans whispered. And the American? His squadron mates reported him landed safely, 31 holes in his aircraft. He flew the next day. Werner felt something crack inside his chest. This was the difference. This was what the numbers meant. The American pilot had survived to fight again. Hans would never fly again. And somewhere, a mother in Iowa or Kansas or wherever that American came from would get a letter saying her son was safe. Werner's mother had gotten a telegram saying her son had lost his arm. I'm sorry, Werner said quietly. I'm so sorry. Hans managed a weak smile. Not your fault. But Werner, his grip tightened. Whatever you're working on, whatever you're finding out about these aircraft, make sure someone listens. Make sure they understand. Because if we keep fighting them the way we are, we're all going to end up like me. Or worse, Werner thought. Or dead. The presentation room was packed. Generals, procurement officers, design engineers, intelligence analysts. Werner stood at the front with his charts and photographs and carefully compiled data. He began simply, Gentlemen, you asked me to analyze the American P-47 Thunderbolt, to discover its secret, to understand why it is effective despite being, by conventional metrics, an inferior fighter aircraft. He paused. I can tell you there is no secret weapon, no magic alloy, no stolen technology. He clicked to the next slide, cross-sections of the armor. What the Americans have created is not a better fighter. They have created a survivable fighter, and there is a profound difference. Murmurs in the room. Werner continued, the P-47 cannot outturn our FDT at low altitude. It cannot out-accelerate our Bf-109. In a guns-only dogfight at 10,000 feet, our aircraft are superior. A colonel in the front row smiled. However, Werner said, and the smile faded, the P-47 is not designed to fight that battle. He showed the turbo supercharger diagrams. It fights from 25,000 to 30,000 feet, where our engines lose power. It dives at over 500 miles per hour. It delivers devastating firepower. And then he clicked to the next image showing the armor and redundant systems. When we hit it with everything we have, it absorbs the damage and continues to function. He showed them the statistics. Since January 1944, P-47 combat sorties, 4-3 Thunderbolt lost to enemy action, 100 pilots killed, 3 pilot survival rate, 8%. He let that sit, then showed the next slide. Luftwaffe fighter losses, same period, aircraft lost, 89 for pilots killed, 68, pilot survival rate, 24%. The room was silent. The P-47 is not winning because it's a better fighter, Werner said quietly. It's winning because it brings its pilots home alive. An average American pilot gets better with every mission. Our average pilot, he hesitated, thinking of Hans. Our average pilot has 3 weeks to live. A general stood, face red. This is defeatist analysis. This is factual analysis, Werner shot back, his voice cracked with emotion. My brother flew a FD when he was shot down by a P-7. He'd hit multiple times. The American flew home with 31 holes in his aircraft. My brother lost his arm. Werner's hands shook. The American flew the next day. My brother will never fly again. The room was deathly quiet. The difference, Werner continued, his voice steady again, is that the Americans designed an aircraft that assumes the pilot is the most valuable component. We designed aircraft that assume the pilot is replaceable. He clicked through images of the armor, the redundant systems, the field-maintainable design. Every kilogram of armor on this aircraft, every redundant system, every maintenance-friendly feature, it represents a choice. They chose to add weight that makes the aircraft slower and less maneuverable, because they calculated that bringing the pilot home alive was worth more than perfect aerodynamics. He looked around the room. And gentlemen, they were right. Because war is not about perfect machines. It's about which side can keep fighting longer. And the side that brings its pilots home alive can keep fighting far longer than the side that burns through trained men like ammunition. After the meeting, silence. Werner gathered his materials, expecting reprimands. Instead, Major Hoffman approached. How long would it take, he asked quietly, to redesign our fighters with these principles? Werner thought about it honestly. To completely redesign? 2 years minimum. To implement even basic improvements, better armor, redundant systems? 18 months. Hoffman's face fell. We don't have 18 months. I know, Werner said. They stood together, looking at the photographs of the P-40. For what it's worth, Hoffman said, your brother is right. Someone needed to say this. even if it's too late to change anything. Werner nodded. At least, he said quietly, maybe someone will remember for next time. Let's hope, Hoffman said. There is no next time. The months that followed told the same story again and again. Young Dieter Vogel encountered Puffs over France in June. This time, he didn't engage. He watched them from a distance, counted the bombers they protected, and returned to base to report. Too many, he wrote in his log, too many to fight. Bobby Hayes in England received a medal after his 50th mission. His P-7 was a patchwork of repairs, more patch than original plane. She's more patched than original now, the crew chief joked. Bobby patted the fuselage affectionately. Long as she brings me home. Werner visited Hans in rehabilitation. His brother was learning to write with his right hand. I'm alive, Hans said. That's more than most of my squadron can say. Combat losses mounted through the summer and fall. Luftwaffe pilot quality declined as experienced pilots died and were replaced by boys with barely any training. The Puffs kept coming, kept fighting, kept bringing their pilots home. April 1940, the war was ending. Everyone knew it. Werner stood in the ruins of the Munich test facility as American tanks rolled past. The captured P-40 had been destroyed in a bombing raid months earlier, but Werner still had his notes, his photographs, his carefully compiled analysis. Footsteps. Werner turned, an American officer, young, wearing pilot's wings and a leather jacket with painted kill markings. Behind him, an older American in civilian clothes with a camera. You speak English? The pilot asked. Some, Werner replied. The pilot looked at the burned remnants of the facility, at the scorched technical drawings still visible on one wall. He pointed at a partially intact P-47 schematic. You studied our aircraft, the pilot said. Werner nodded. Yes. What did you think? Werner hesitated, then decided honesty was all he had left. I thought it was the first fighter aircraft I'd ever examined that was designed by engineers who valued the pilot's life. The American pilot blinked. That's a hell of a thing to say. It is true, Werner said simply. The pilot walked to the burned schematic, studied it. I flew jugs, 63 missions. He touched his chest, got hit bad 4 times, walked away every time. His voice went quiet. Lost a lot of friends in other aircraft. Good pilots, better than me probably, but they flew planes that couldn't take the beating. Werner nodded slowly. He pulled out his battered notebook, opened it to a page of calculations. The P-47's pilot survival rate when shot down is 3 times higher than our fighters. 3 times. He met the American's eyes. That is not accident. That is design philosophy. The pilot pulled something from his jacket, a blood-stained, oil-stained field manual, the same type Werner had examined months ago. This saved my life twice, the pilot said, not the aircraft. This, he handed it to Werner. The section on flying with a dead engine, the section on landing with damaged gear, the section that assumes everything will go wrong and teaches you what to do anyway. Werner took the manual, felt its weight, all those careful instructions for surviving the unsurvivable. You can keep that, the American said. War's over. Maybe, he gestured at the ruins, maybe someone learns something from it. The civilian with the camera had been watching quietly. Now he spoke for the first time in accented German. I'm a technical writer. I helped write that manual." He pointed at it. "We wrote it for farm boys and mechanics. We assumed they'd be terrified, wounded, alone. So we talked to them like partners, not subordinates. We told them, your aircraft can survive almost anything. Here's how you help it." Werner felt his throat tighten. We did not think this way." The writer nodded sadly. "I know. We captured a lot of your manuals. They were written for expert pilots in perfect conditions." He paused. "But war is never perfect." The American pilot extended his hand. "Lieutenant Robert Hayes. Everyone calls me Bobby." Werner shook it. "Dr. Werner Scholz, aeronautical engineer." "Your brother fly fighters?" Bobby asked, noting the pain in Werner's eyes. "Yes, FW-190. He was shot down by a pipe. He survived, but—" Werner's voice caught. "He lost his arm." Bobby's face darkened with genuine sympathy. "I'm sorry, truly." He looked at the pivot schematic again. "The guy who shot him down, he probably went home that night, wrote a letter to his mom, and flew again the next day. And your brother will never fly again." Werner finished quietly. They stood in silence for a moment. "That's the difference, isn't it?" Bobby said softly. "Not the aircraft, the philosophy. You built beautiful machines. We built machines that brought ugly boys like me home to our mothers." Werner felt tears on his face and didn't wipe them away. "Yes," he said, "that is the difference." Werner Scholz worked in the post-war aviation industry for 3 decades. He designed civilian aircraft that prioritized safety and redundancy over performance. When young engineers argued for lighter, faster designs, he would tell them about the P-47. "The best machine," he would say, "is not the one that performs perfectly under ideal conditions. The best machine is the one that keeps working when everything has gone wrong, when it's been damaged, when the operator is terrified, when all the elegant mathematics have met the ugly reality of failure." He would pause, thinking of Hans, of Bobby Hayes, of all the young men who had died in beautiful aircraft that couldn't bring them home. "The best machine," he would finish quietly, "is the one that says to its operator, 'I will bring you home, no matter what.'" Republic P-47 Thunderbolt. Total produced, 15,000 combat losses, 3,000 pilot deaths, 950. Pilots brought home, 1430. The P-47 flew its last combat mission in 1950, 10 years after the war ended. By then, jets had replaced propeller fighters, and the Jug was obsolete. But most of its pilots lived to see their grandchildren. That was the real victory.